and welcome to Money Trail with me, Amir Arafat. Today, the Wall Street casino, where hundreds and hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of our past, present, and future is at stake. Wall Street has, especially over the past decades, turned into a gigantic financial casino. The big Wall Street banks are making tens of billions of dollars a year in the derivatives market, and nobody in the financial community wants the party to end.
What started out as simple insurance products has morphed into a really bizarre set of gambling instruments.
Well, out goes a real productive economy. Everything from agriculture to industry to technology. Remember GM, Ford, Daimler, Chrysler, the bankruptcies just a few years back. And remember catchphrases like, what's good for GM is good for America. Well, that's out the window. And what's in is basically financial products, innovative Wall Street casino products, anything from mortgage backed securities to credit default swaps to options, tens of different financial products. No one can make heads or tails of them. The scariest of all, the boondoggle, the derivatives market, whose size boggles the mind. We're talking hundreds of trillions of dollars to anywhere near $4 to $8 quadrillion. But how big is a quadrillion dollars? How many zeros? We're talking 15 zeros here. Boggles the mind, right? Especially when you compare this with the GDP of the entire globe, anywhere between $70 to $75 trillion. So we're talking 4 to 8,000 million dollars. The word derivative sounds complicated and technical, but understanding the concept is not really that hard. A derivative is essentially a fancy way of saying that a bet has been made. Originally, these bets were designed to hedge risk, but today, the derivatives market has mushroomed into a mountain of speculation unlike anything the world has ever seen before.
First of all, let's just explain what derivatives are in general. If you have a bond, that is a debt obligation of a company. If you have a share of stock, that is a piece of ownership of a company. If you have a deed to some real estate, that means you own it. So that you can call the first level of securities or financial paper that are directly related to some property in the tangible, physical, real world. But when we get into derivatives, we're talking about other kinds of securities, other kinds of financial paper, which are based on those. So they derive their value from the underlying financial paper. And these have grown enormously in the last 30 years in particular. I regard them as the most dangerous, most toxic, most explosive form of financial speculation.
Estimates of the notional value of the worldwide derivatives markets go from $600 trillion all the way up to $4 quadrillion. It's important to note that a gross domestic product of the entire world is only somewhere in the neighborhood of $70 to $75 trillion. But it's inevitable that at some point this entire mess is going to come crashing down. And when it does, the world will face a derivatives crisis that could really destroy the entire global financial system.
When you talk about the size of the derivatives market, the lowest estimate I've heard is $600 trillion. The higher estimates I've heard are somewhere between $3.5 and $4 quadrillion. Please remember that a quadrillion is 1,000 trillion. So you're looking on the upper end at $4,000 trillion. The global gross domestic product right now is around $75 trillion. There aren't enough goods, there aren't enough commodities, there isn't enough ore in the ground, there aren't enough trees, there aren't enough anything to cover this type of bet.
The amount of money at stake is absolutely staggering. Graham Summers of the Phoenix Capital Research estimates that a notional value of the global derivatives market. In an article for Seeking Alpha, it tried to put that number into perspective. If you add up the value of every stock on the planet, the entire market capitalization would be about $36 trillion. If you do the same process for bonds, you get a market capitalization of roughly $72 trillion. The notional value of the derivative market is roughly $1.4 quadrillion. Let's see how huge $1.4 quadrillion really is. $1.4 quadrillion is roughly 40 times the world's stock market, 10 times the value of every stock and every bond on the planet, 23 times world GDP. It is hard to fathom how much money a quadrillion is. If you started counting right now at $1 per second, it would take millions of years to count to $1 quadrillion.
What we're talking about here are two main kinds. There are the exchange-traded derivatives. Here in the United States, they go across the Chicago Mercantile Exchange or the Chicago Board Options Exchange. In London, you have the London ICE Exchange, you have the London LIFI and its descendants. So here we're talking about futures, options, and indices, and also all the combinations of those. Those are exchange traded. It's estimated that the value of those, so-called the price of those at any given time, is about 700 trillion, 800 trillion, 900 trillion US dollars. But then there's a whole other dimension, which are the so-called over-the-counter derivatives, the swaps sometimes called. These are private contracts between companies, individuals, counterparties. They take place in private offices, and they're thought to be another 700 to 800 trillion in existence at any given time. And nobody knows really how much there are of those, because in most countries of the world, they're not reportable. We have the Dodd-Frank Act here in the United States, which is supposed to begin making them reportable and known, but they're very pessimistic that that's going to happen. So I would say in today's world, we've probably got between 1.5 quadrillion, and that is to say 1,500 billion US dollars in total derivatives, but they're always being bought and sold. So when we talk about turnover, the sales every year, we're probably in the neighborhood of 6 quadrillion, 7 quadrillion, 8 quadrillion. And again, the uncertainty is because nobody knows. There's no legal compulsion for a lot of these derivatives to be brought to the attention of governments.
Derivatives are financial instruments used to hedge risks or for speculation. They are derived from stocks, bonds, loans, currencies, and commodities, or linked to specific events, such as changes in the weather or interest rates. The key word there is speculation. Today, the folks down on Wall Street are speculating on just about anything that one can imagine. A derivative has no underlying value of its own. A derivative is essentially a side bet. Usually these side bets are highly leveraged. At this point, making side bets has totally gotten out of control in the financial world. Side bets are being made in just about anything one can possibly imagine, and the major Wall Street banks are making a ton of money from it. This system is almost entirely unregulated, and it is totally dominated by the big international banks.
The problem with the derivatives market is that it is largely based upon things that one cannot see. The over-the-counter trading in the derivatives markets is largely unregulated. Now, in 2010, after the crash, Congress passed the so-called Frank-Dodd Act, which was ostensibly designed to place more regulations on these derivatives markets and these exotic financial instruments. However, it really hasn't fundamentally enhanced the stability of the economies in the United States or in Europe. A good example of this, of course, is the still high unemployment rate, the still very, very shaky consumer confidence. So these two elements would be key in any type of real financial recovery.
The full legalization and rehabilitation of derivatives only occurred in the year 2000. And from there, it's a straight march, right, 5 or 6 years, to this huge financial cataclysm, which is the world derivatives panic and banking panic of 2007, 2008, 2009. Compare it to 1987. In 1987, we had exchange-traded derivatives, but not over-the-counter. So it was kept within bounds, although that had far-reaching consequences. If you look at the dot-com bubble of 2000, 2001, you'll see that that got quite serious too, but it didn't turn into a world depression. It was only when you had the real estate bubble and then the securitization of the real estate mortgages in subprime made into derivatives, made into collateralized debt obligations with credit default swaps piled on top of those, and some of them incorporated into structured investment vehicles, that you got this critical mass which has blown up the US and British banking systems and pitched the world into this depression.
Today, the notional value of all the derivatives held by Bank of America comes to approximately $75 trillion. JP Morgan Chase is holding derivatives with a notional value of about $79 trillion. It is hard to even conceive of such figures. Right now, the banks with the most exposure to derivatives are JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, and HSBC Bank USA. Morgan Stanley also has tremendous exposure to derivatives. These are some of the major too big to fail, too big to jail banks. The biggest U.S. banks continue to grow, and they continue to get even more power. Back in 2002, the top 10 U.S. banks controlled some 55% of all U.S. banking assets. Today, the top 10 U.S. banks control well over 80% of all U.S. banking assets.
When they repealed Glass-Steagall Act in the United States, the banks have gone wild since then. And there's no regulation, there's no oversight, there's nothing to stop the financial follies of these banks who continue to make billions of dollars.
All the unemployment in the world today, right, it's in the hundreds of millions. 30 million real unemployed in the United States, 40 or 45 million unemployed in the European Union. All of that is directly related to this derivatives bubble, which blew out essentially the economic, the financial system of the world.
Over the past couple of decades, the derivatives market has multiplied in size. Everything is going to be fine as long as the system stays in balance. But once it gets out of balance, we could witness a string of financial crashes that no government on earth will be able to fix.
All it takes is for a series of cascading events for any one of these derivative instruments to go bad, and the whole house of cards could come down and paralyze the global economy. Now, really, these banks are the too big to fail banks, and these banks have become a threat to national security in the United States, as well as to the entire global security as well.
Far from being some arcane or marginal activity, financial derivatives have come to represent the principal business of the financier oligarchy in Wall Street, the City of London, Frankfurt, and other money centers. A concerted effort has been made by the politicians and the news media to hide and camouflage the central role played by the derivative speculation in the economic disasters of recent years. Journalists and public relations types have done everything possible to avoid even mentioning the word derivatives, coining phrases like toxic assets, exotic instruments, and most notably, troubled assets, as in Troubled Assets Relief Program or TARP. Most people do not realize this, but derivatives were at the center of the financial crisis of 2008. They will almost certainly be at the center of the next financial crisis as well.
There's going to be another financial catastrophe that's looming here, and when that happens, it's the greatest threat to national security that the U.S. has, and it's probably the greatest threat to global security, because when these financial markets finally collapse, and they will, because the Federal Reserve has done some unauthorized, and what I consider to be illegal acts to prop up European banks to support the euro dollar or the euro as a currency. When these things collapse, it's going to be economic pandemonium for everyone in the world, and we're going to see shortages, we're going to see famine, we're going to see the entire system of commerce globally may shut down. And this is really distressing.
What exactly is the difference between the Wall Street casino and other casinos, namely Vegas, let's say? Well, in Vegas, it's those who take part. It's the gamblers who might win or lose. Whereas in Wall Street, everyone is impacted. And everything, all prices. Long time since Thomas Aquinas' just price centuries ago. Today, everything from gasoline to rice to bread to your house to your car. Everything is gambled. Trillions and trillions of dollars. and mortgage-backed securities, derivatives, options, just name it. All sorts of financial innovations. And that's what's setting the price. That's why when you gas up the car, what you're paying is not the real just price.
You mentioned things like oil, gasoline, food, rice, and so forth. Now we're talking about commodities markets, and they have special problems. But the derivatives, once again, are at the center of everything. I would recommend that we look at, for example, the London ICE exchange. And what we find here is that the gasoline price, for example, worldwide is totally determined by speculation. It is not determined by supply and demand. We saw in 2008, the oil price reached $150 a barrel approximately. Then when Wall Street blew out with Lehman Brothers in September of 2008, it went all the way down to $35. This is not based on economic fundamentals. It's purely speculative. And what happened in 2008 was that the bankrupt banks had to sell assets in order to avoid bankruptcy. And that's what brought down the price of oil. Then when they got down to $35 a barrel, they looked around and they wanted to see if Obama would do anything to regulate derivatives. They found that he would not. And then it went right back up again. And we're back up to 140 or 150 or at various times since then.
All of these issues, everything that anyone in the world uses, touches, consumes in any way is backed by some or has some derivative attached to it.
The trick here is something called energy derivatives, right? This is one version of derivatives. And in particular, I would call your attention to commodity index swaps. This is one kind of derivative that should be outlawed, banned, with federal penalties, jail time, if you insist on selling them. Commodity index swaps are one, and then we have exchange-traded funds based on commodity futures. An exchange-traded fund, ETF, very popular in Wall Street. It's a kind of closed-end mutual fund, you might call it, but there it is, an exchange-traded fund, but based on commodity futures. Those are the two destructive tools that are used to bid up the price of gasoline, but also wheat, rice, food elements, and so forth. And now we're getting into high crimes against humanity because once you're tampering with food and fuel, you're putting human lives on the line. So it would be urgent to ban those two kinds of derivatives.
As too big to fail, Wall Street big business, from big banks to big oil, gamble with everyone else's money. The question is, who's winning and who's losing? Well, they are the house, and the house never loses. How could big banks lose? After all, they're not gambling with their money. They're gambling with everyone else's money, from the investors who trust them to the taxpayers who'll be asked to bail them out once they go belly up. There's also this new gimmick called bail-in. That is, when taxpayers can no longer afford to bail them out, they go to the investors. It's called bail-in. So who's winning and who's losing?
Well, the bankers are the only winners. They're the only winners. Whenever the initial bailout came out, the TARP money, the $900 billion in TARP money, that money was intended to be lent to business in the U.S. so that small businesses could have working capital to see themselves through a tough time. The banks misappropriated that money. They stuck it into U.S. Treasury bonds, and they used that money to acquire their smaller rivals. So, as you said, the big banks have gotten even bigger, and there's still very little lending going on. It's nearly impossible for any business to qualify for a line of credit, to grow, expand. The venture capital market is dead. There's no money going into new businesses, startups. That's not happening at all. And the banks have focused really on lining their own pockets, rewarding their own executives, and they're really ignoring the needs of the country.
But who's looking after the interests of we, the people? Whatever happened to this social contract, the contract between the electorate and their elected officials in this democracy of the people, by the people, and for the people. Where are the representatives, the congressmen and women, the senators? Where is the elected White House? Apparently, they're having too many problems weaning themselves off of the so-called donations, gambled money coming from the big business on Wall Street.
The banking sector inside the United States largely controls the government. And this is not a stretch to state this. The fact of the matter is, if you look at the White House, you look at the Obama administration, who are the major financial and economic advisors? They are people who come from Wall Street themselves, the Timothy Geithners, the Daleys, and others who in fact were very much connected with the financial crisis. So therefore, it's almost impossible under the current system for any real regulation to be enforced.
Look at the 5 big banks. It's J.P. Morgan Chase, it's Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and Merrill Lynch. Those are the ones who have the greatest derivatives exposure. Now you look at the U.S. political system and find out who the biggest donors are to both political parties and to most politicians, the same 5 big banks. Now, this shows that the U.S. Political system has been compromised by these big banks, and this is, prima facie proof that the U.S. system is broken, and that these banks have indeed become a threat to national security in the United States. And our government needs to step up and do the right thing instead of lining their own pockets with campaign contributions. They need to start prosecuting these banks for their criminal activities, which is what this really is.
On September 17, 2011, the bottom 99% of the American people decided they were sick and tired of this trillion-dollar gamble with their money, with their fortunes, with their jobs and homes. They launched this global anti-Wall Street campaign. Thousands poured onto the streets only to face batons and arrests, weathering the elements. What happened at the end of the day? The represented officials tried to suppress them. Yet when you talk to the movements and the movement organizers and those people that took part, you realize that the movement is well and alive and smoldering under the ashes of the rubble of their lives. Yet they're still searching for the solution, knowing the solution is not the battle box. So what is the solution after all?
This needs to stop. Cooler heads need to prevail. We need a new financial system. The Federal Reserve needs to be shut down. If it was me, I would send U.S. Marshals in to seize the Federal Reserve. I would use the power of eminent domain to take the function that the Federal Reserve served. I would preserve the infrastructure and take the function of the Fed back into the Treasury where it constitutionally belongs. That's what we need to do. And you have these bankers who are buying our politicians. They're rubbing money on it. They hire lobbyists. They can create money out of thin air. They have black screen money they can create. They have no shortage of money. They can reward the politicians who support them with ample campaign donations. They can punish the ones who they don't like, who stand up against them. The American people have lost their voice. We're living under a bank tyranny right now. And this needs to stop. This is, as I said, I will repeat it again and again. This is a clear and present danger to the people of the United States and to the U.S. government.
When the house goes bust, everybody loses. The governments of the world could step in and try to bail everyone out. But the reality is that when the derivatives market comes totally crashing down, there will not be any government on earth with enough money to put it back together again. A horrible derivatives crisis is coming. It is only a matter of time. Stay alert for any mention of the word derivatives or the term derivatives crisis in the news. When the derivatives crisis does arrive, things will start falling apart very rapidly.
Whenever the system collapses, there's going to be so much pain, so much despair, so much anxiety in this country that people aren't going to take it sitting down. You want to know the real reason why Department of Homeland Security bought 1.6 billion bullets? It's to suppress the civil unrest that's going to happen after the financial collapse of the U.S. economy. That's why. They're going to keep people in line through violence against the American people. And that's really what we're looking at here. We still have a little bit of time to address this, but we don't have much time to address this because once it collapses, you're not going to be able to put that house of cards back together. And we're going to end up in a situation where the big banks own every asset in this country, including the government assets. As I said earlier, they're going to own every F-16, they're going to own every aircraft carrier, they're going to own every national park. They will own everything if they're allowed to foreclose on this country.
Well, thank you for watching. Always follow the money trail with me, Amir Arfa.